An 8-year-old poor girl sang to a sad stranger on the subway. She didn't know he was a millionaire who had just lost his daughter. Before anything else, if this video finds you well, wherever you are, let me know how it made you feel. At the end, the Chicago winter had never felt so cold to Jackson Reed. Not the biting wind that whipped between the skyscrapers, nor the flurries of snow that dusted his expensive wool coat. No, this was a different kind of cold. One that had settled deep in his chest the moment he'd laid his daughter's framed photo against her headstone. Jackson sat alone on the subway, his tall frame hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, as silent tears tracked down his face. All around him, the evening commuters of Chicago moved in their own worlds, typing on phones, listening to music, chatting with companions. But Jackson might as well have been invisible, or perhaps they simply knew to give a grieving man his space. 1 month. That's how long it had been since the accident that took Sophie from him. 1 month of waking up expecting to hear her laughter, echoing through their penthouse only to be met with suffocating silence. 1 month of board meetings and conference calls he couldn't remember attending, of condolence cards he couldn't bear to read. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket. Calls from his executive assistant, from business partners, from his sister, Claire. All wanting pieces of him he simply didn't have to give anymore. He pulled out his phone, not to answer the calls but to look at the wallpaper. Sophie on her last birthday, blowing out candles, her golden curls catching the light. Her smile bright enough to illuminate the entire room. Just 6 years old, too young to understand mortality, too innocent to deserve its cold touch. Final call for Fullerton Station, the automated voice announced over the speakers. Jackson didn't move. He didn't care where the train took him. What did destinations matter anymore? His thumb gently caressed the screen, smudging a teardrop that had fallen on Sophie's digitized face. "Daddy?" He heard her voice in his memory. "You promised you'd never be sad." A promise he'd made when she'd found him crying on the anniversary of her mother's death, a wife lost in childbirth, a tragedy that had made Sophie both his greatest joy and a living reminder of his deepest loss. Until now, when she became just loss. The subway doors opened and closed at each station, passengers flowing in and out like tide, while Jackson remained, an island of grief in an ocean of moving life. The CEO of Reed Enterprises, worth billions, on paper now bankrupt in spirit. The train lurched to another stop. Jackson barely registered the commotion as 2 small figures entered the car, their voices hushed but urgent. We have to ask someone," one tiny voice whispered. "But Lily, Mommy said never talk to strangers," came the identical response. Jackson looked up through blurred vision to see 2 little girls, no more than 5 years old, clutching each other's hands. They were mirror images, same golden blonde, hair in messy ponytails, same bright blue eyes wide with uncertainty, same worn pink coats that had seen better days. His heart constricted painfully. They were Sophie's age when... No, they were younger than Sophie. Their small faces were smudged, with dirt, their shoes scuffed and too thin for the winter weather. One of them, Lily or he couldn't tell which, clutched a tattered teddy bear missing one eye. The girls scanned the subway car with solemn determination, then their gazes locked on him. Something in his broken expression must have called to them because they approached with tentative steps. "Excuse me, mister?" The one with the teddy bear spoke, her voice small but clear. "Could you help us? We're lost and we need to find our mommy." Jackson blinked, quickly wiping away his tears with the back of his hand. He straightened, instinct taking over despite his grief. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. The second twin stepped forward, protective of her sister. "She's sick, very sick. We were supposed to stay with Mrs. Porter, but she fell asleep and we wanted to get medicine for Mommy." Jackson's professional instincts kicked in, assessing the situation. 2 small children, alone, clearly underprivileged, possibly homeless. His mind cleared slightly, responsibility cutting through the fog of his personal tragedy. "What's your mother's name? Where do you live?" he asked gently. The first twin's lower lip trembled. "Catherine Miller." We live. We lived. Her voice broke, and suddenly both girls were crying. Our home is gone, the second twin managed between sobs. Please help us, mister. Mommy's sick and we don't know where to go. Something cracked open in Jackson's frozen heart. A fissure just wide enough for these two lost souls to slip through. He knelt down to their level, and as he looked into their terrified, hopeful eyes, he saw a reflection of his own daughter. The pain was unbearable, but with it came something else, a purpose, however fleeting. My name is Jackson, he said softly, offering his hand. And I promise we're going to find your mother. A promise he didn't know if he could keep, but the first words that had felt real leaving his lips in a month. And as the twins' tiny hands reached for his, Jackson Reed began to cry once more, not just for the daughter he had lost, but for these children who needed him now. The subway car lurched forward as Jackson gathered himself, still kneeling before the twins. Their small faces, streaked with tears yet filled with trust, stirred something protective within him. Let's start with your names, Jackson said gently, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe their tears. I'm Emma, said the one clutching the one-eyed teddy bear. And this is Lily. We're 5. Lily nodded solemnly, her tiny fingers still intertwined with her sister's. Are you sad because you lost someone too? She asked with the disarming directness only children possess. Jackson's breath caught. Yes, he managed after a moment. My daughter, Sophie. Where did she go? Emma asked, hugging her teddy tighter. To heaven, Jackson whispered, the words still feeling like glass in his throat. Emma's eyes widened. Our daddy went there too. Mommy says he watches over us. Jackson swallowed hard, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. He glanced around the nearly empty subway car, then back at the girls' thin coats and worn shoes. Decision made, he stood and offered his hands to them. Let's find your mother. Do you remember where you were staying before you got on the train? The twins exchanged uncertain glances. The shelter on Madison Street, Lily finally said. But Mommy got too sick and they said we couldn't stay anymore. Jackson's jaw tightened at the thought of a sick woman and her daughters being turned away. He checked his watch. Nearly 8 p.m. The temperature outside was dropping rapidly. When did you last eat? He asked, noticing how their small shoulders seemed to bend under invisible weight. Emma's stomach growled in response, and she blushed. Yesterday, maybe. Jackson guided them off at the next stop, his mind racing through options. The CEO in him, the part he'd neglected since Sophie's death, began strategizing. First, food, then shelter, then find Catherine Miller. At a small diner near the station, he watched as the twins devoured grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate, their initial wariness melting away with each bite. The waitress shot curious glances at the unlikely trio, a man in a $1,000 coat with 2 clearly underprivileged children. My mommy's really smart, Lily said between bites. She was a teacher before she got sick. The best teacher, Emma added loyally. She reads us stories even when her voice gets too tired. As they ate, Jackson made calls, to homeless shelters, to hospitals. No Catherine Miller registered anywhere. The twins couldn't remember their last address, just that they'd moved a lot. When Emma yawned, her small face fighting exhaustion, Jackson made another decision. He called his driver, then his housekeeper, to prepare the guest room at his penthouse. Would you girls trust me to give you a safe place to sleep tonight? He asked. I promise we'll find your mother tomorrow. Lily looked at him skeptically, but Emma, perhaps sensing the genuine concern beneath his grief-worn exterior, nodded. You have kind eyes, she said simply. Like Mommy's. In the back of his sleek black car, the twins marveled at the leather seats and twinkling city lights. Their innocent wonder reminded Jackson painfully of Sophie, yet somehow it didn't pierce as sharply as before. There was something else mixing with the grief now, a strange, tentative purpose. As they drove through Chicago's gleaming financial district, Emma suddenly pressed her face against the window. Look, Lily, the Angel Building. Jackson followed, her gaze to the towering Reed Enterprises headquarters, its illuminated spire piercing the night sky. That's where I work, he said softly. Emma turned to him with wide eyes. You work with the angels? A small, genuine smile, the first in a month, tugged at Jackson's lips. No, but sometimes I think they work with me. When they arrived at his penthouse, the twins stood frozen in the marble foyer, clutching each other's hands. Is this a palace? Lily whispered. Jackson looked around at the cold opulence that had felt so empty since Sophie's death. Through their eyes, he saw it differently. Not as a mausoleum of memories, but as a sanctuary that could offer warmth and safety. It's just a house, he said, kneeling to their level again. But tonight, it's your house too. As he tucked them into the guest bed, both still clutching Emma's teddy between them, Jackson felt the ice around his heart crack a little more. Will you find our mommy tomorrow? Emma asked sleepily. I promise, Jackson said, meaning it more than any business deal he'd ever made. Now sleep, little ones. And for the first time since Sophie's death, Jackson Reed sat down to plan for tomorrow. Dawn brought a flurry of activity to Jackson's normally silent penthouse. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night researching Catherine Miller and calling contacts who might help. His assistant, Martha, nearly dropped her coffee when she arrived to find her boss, who had been a ghost of himself for weeks, already dressed and focused with two small girls eating pancakes at his kitchen island. Mr. Reed, she stammered. I didn't realize you had guests. Martha, meet Emma and Lily, Jackson said, pouring coffee. Their mother is missing and we're going to find her. Clear my schedule. The twins watched this exchange with wide eyes, syrup dripping from their forks. They looked different in the morning light, still in yesterday's clothes, but their faces were clean and their hair brushed after Jackson had awkwardly helped them wash up. You have a swimming pool in your bathroom, Lily had exclaimed at the sight of his marble tub, making Jackson smile despite himself. Now, as Martha made calls and arranged for a private investigator, Jackson knelt before the girls. Do you remember anything else about where you were staying? Any landmarks or special places nearby? Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. There was a big lion statue. Mommy said it was guarding us. The public library, Jackson and Martha said simultaneously, and a park with a broken carousel, Lily added quietly. Mommy promised someday we'd ride on one that worked. Jackson nodded, pieces falling into place. They were staying near Grant Park, probably in one of the shelters on South Michigan. An hour later, bundled in new coats Jackson had Martha purchase overnight, they began their search. The twins sat in the back of his car, faces pressed against windows as they pointed out familiar sights. That's where Mommy took us for hot chocolate. Once, Emma exclaimed, pointing to a small cafe. It was her birthday present to us. Jackson made note of every location, creating a map of Catherine Miller's desperate attempts to give her daughters moments of joy amid their struggles. At the third shelter, a tired-looking woman recognized the twins' photo on Jackson's phone. Catherine Miller, she confirmed. Sweet woman, terrible situation. She left 4 days ago when her fever got worse. We recommended Mercy Hospital, but we were at capacity and couldn't hold her spot. Jackson's chest tightened. 4 days? These children have been alone for 4 days? The woman shook her head. She had a neighbor watching them, elderly lady, in the apartment building they were staying in before eviction. Mrs. Porter, Lily whispered. She fell asleep. 3 hospitals later, they found her. Catherine Miller had been admitted to County General 4 days ago with pneumonia and severe dehydration. No identification, no insurance, listed as Jane Doe until she became coherent enough to give her name yesterday. She's been asking about her daughters, the nurse told Jackson. We contacted social services, but they're here, Jackson said firmly. They're with me. The nurse eyed him suspiciously. And you are? Jackson hesitated. A friend, he finally said. When the twins saw their mother, pale and thin against the hospital sheets, an IV in her arm, they broke from Jackson's gentle hold and rushed to her bedside. Mommy, they cried in unison. Catherine's eyes flew open, filling instantly with tears. My babies, she whispered, arms weakly reaching for them. How did you? Then she saw Jackson standing awkwardly in the doorway, still in his expensive coat, looking so out of place in the stark hospital room. Who are you? She asked, instinctively pulling her daughters closer. Before Jackson could answer, Emma piped up. He's our friend. He gave us pancakes and found you when we got lost. Catherine's eyes, the same bright blue as her daughter's, narrowed with suspicion and fear. Jackson recognized it immediately, the fierce protectiveness of a parent. Jackson? Reed, he said simply, staying by the door to give her space. Your daughters found me on the subway last night. They were very brave. Catherine looked horrified. You ran away from Mrs. Porter? She asked the twins. You could have been... Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. They were trying to find medicine for you, Jackson said softly. They're remarkable children. Catherine studied him, for a long moment, her gaze taking in his tailored suit, his expensive watch, everything that screamed wealth and privilege. Everything she clearly lacked. Thank you for helping them, she said finally, her voice formal despite her condition. I can never repay you, but... No repayment necessary, Jackson interrupted, an unexpected lump forming in his throat as he watched Emma gently stroke her mother's hair. They helped me too. And as Catherine's questioning gaze met his, Jackson Reed, billionaire CEO, grieving father, felt something shift inside him, something that felt strangely like hope. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft chatter of the twins, who were coloring with supplies Jackson had purchased from the gift shop. Catherine watched him from her bed, a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Why are you still here? She finally asked when the girls were distracted. 3 days had passed since Jackson had found her, and he'd returned each day, bringing clothes. For the twins, decent food to replace the hospital meals, and even a tablet loaded with educational games. Jackson looked up from his phone where he'd been answering emails. I told the girls I'd stay until you were better. But you don't know us, Catherine insisted, her voice low to avoid the twins' hearing. People like you don't just. She trailed off, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes. People like me, Jackson echoed. Catherine gestured weakly at his custom suit, his Italian shoes. Rich people. You've done your good deed. Rescued the homeless family. What more do you want? The question hung between them, and Jackson found himself without an easy answer. What did he want? He hadn't thought beyond finding Catherine, hadn't considered what would happen after. Your daughters remind me of someone, he said finally, avoiding her piercing gaze. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. You lost someone. Jackson nodded, the familiar ache spreading through his chest. My daughter, Sophie. She was 6. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered, and despite her suspicion, the sympathy in her voice was genuine. When? A month ago. Car accident. The twins looked up at the change in his tone, their young faces concerned. Emma slipped from her chair and approached Jackson, placing her small hand on his. Are you sad about Sophie again? She asked. Catherine watched, astonished, as her normally shy daughter comforted this virtual stranger. Even more surprising was the way Jackson gently squeezed Emma's hand. A little, he admitted. But it helps being here with you and Lily. The doctor interrupted them, clipboard in hand. Good news, Ms. Miller. Your lungs are clearing up nicely. We should be able to discharge you tomorrow. Rather than relief, panic flashed across Catherine's face. Tomorrow? But I haven't found a place yet. The shelter is full. The doctor finished sympathetically. I know. Social Services is working on it, but with the current housing crisis. Jackson stood abruptly. She has a place to go. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. Mr. Reed, Catherine began. I appreciate everything you've done, but we can't accept. I own a building in Lincoln Park, Jackson interrupted. It has a vacant apartment. It's yours until you get back on your feet. The doctor nodded approvingly, before leaving them to discuss the details. As soon as the door closed, Catherine's expression hardened. We're not your charity case, she said firmly. And I don't accept handouts from strangers, no matter how expensive their suits are. Jackson sat on the edge of her bed, surprising her with his directness. Before Sophie died, I was working 18-hour days building my company. I missed so much. His voice broke slightly. After she was gone, nothing mattered. I was just going through the motions. Then your daughters found me. Catherine's defenses wavered as she glanced at the twins, now back to their coloring. Emma and Lily gave me a reason to get out of bed these past few days. Jackson continued. So consider the apartment payment for therapy services rendered. P. Reluctant smile tugged at Catherine's lips. You're persistent, Mr. Reed. Jackson, he corrected. And yes, it's how I built a Fortune 500 company before 40. Catherine studied him for a long moment. What company? Reed Enterprises. Her eyes widened. The Reed Enterprises? The Angel Building? She glanced at her daughters, understanding. Emma's earlier comment? Jackson nodded, suddenly self-conscious under her scrutiny. I was a teacher before I got sick, Catherine said softly. I taught my students about your sustainable energy initiative last year. Something shifted between them. A moment of recognition beyond their circumstances. A glimpse of the people they were beyond, wealthy businessman and homeless mother. 1 month, Catherine finally said. We'll stay 1 month while I find work and save for a place of our own. 3 months, Jackson countered, the businessman in him emerging. Catherine raised an eyebrow. 2, and I'll cook dinner for you once a week as rent. Deal, Jackson said, offering his hand. As they shook on it, Lily looked up from her coloring book. Does this mean we get to keep our new friend? Both adults turned to her, momentarily speechless, the innocent question laying bare the unexpected connection that had formed between these unlikely allies. Yes, Jackson answered before Catherine could. It does. This isn't an apartment, Catherine whispered, as they stepped into the spacious 3-bedroom unit on the 10th floor of Jackson's Lincoln Park building. This is a palace. The twins raced ahead, their excited squeals echoing off the high ceilings as they discovered each room. Catherine stood frozen in the entryway, clutching her small bag of belongings, all that remained after months of downsizing and desperation. It's furnished, of course, Jackson said, watching her reaction carefully. Nothing fancy, but... Nothing fancy? Catherine repeated, taking in the gleaming hardwood floors, the wall of windows overlooking the park, the modern furniture that probably cost more than she'd made in her last year of teaching. Jackson, this is... temporary, he reminded her gently. 2 months, remember? Catherine nodded, but the tightness in her throat remained. Pride had kept her going through her illness, through the evictions, through the nights in shelters when she'd told the twins they were on a grand adventure. Now that same pride made accepting this generosity almost physically painful. The kitchen is stocked, Jackson continued, leading her further inside. And there's a doorman downstairs if you need anything. Mommy, Lily called, running back to them. There are beds with purple blankets and books. So many books. Catherine's composure finally broke at the sight of her daughter's joy. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Tears she hadn't allowed herself since her diagnosis 2 years ago. Jackson discreetly stepped away, giving her a moment to collect herself. When she found him again, he was in the smaller bedroom, helping Emma arrange her tattered teddy bear on a shelf beside a row of new stuffed animals. You didn't have to do all this, Catherine said from the doorway. Jackson shrugged, his expression unreadable. I've had a lot of resources and nowhere meaningful to direct them lately. That evening, after the twins were tucked into their new beds, still marveling at having separate rooms for the first time in their lives, Catherine found Jackson on the balcony, staring at the city lights. Thank you, she said simply, joining him at the railing. Not just for this, but for finding me. For keeping them safe. Jackson nodded, his profile sharp against the night sky. How did it happen? He asked after a moment. You said you were a teacher. Catherine sighed, the familiar weight of her story settling on her shoulders. Autoimmune disorder. Started with fatigue, then joint pain. By the time they diagnosed it properly, I'd used up my sick days and most of my savings, the medical bills. She shook her head. The twins' father left when I got pregnant, said he hadn't signed up for twins. So it was just me. The American dream, Jackson said bitterly. Work hard, get sick, lose everything. Catherine glanced at him, surprised by his cynicism. Says the billionaire CEO. A system that allows me to have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes while a teacher and her children end up homeless is broken. Jackson said flatly. I've known that for years, but it was abstract. Numbers on spreadsheets. Charity. Gallus. Not real people with names and faces and teddy bears with missing eyes. Catherine studied him, seeing beyond the wealthy exterior to the man beneath. A father grieving his child, a person seeking meaning after loss. Tell me about Sophie, she said softly. Jackson's hands tightened on the railing. She was everything. Smart, funny, kind. Her mother died giving birth to her, so it was just us. I built the company for her future, but I missed so much of her present. His voice caught. The day of the accident, I was supposed to pick her up from school, but I sent my driver instead. Board meeting. It wasn't your fault, Catherine said automatically, wasn't it? Jackson turned to her, his eyes reflecting city lights and unshed tears. I traded time with her for time making money she'll never spend. The rawness of his guilt silenced Catherine. She judged him for his wealth, his privilege, never considering the cost at which it might have come. My daughters adore you, she said finally. Emma asks when you're coming every morning. Lily saved half her dessert for you yesterday. Jackson smiled faintly. They're extraordinary children. They are, Catherine agreed. And they're very good judges of character. A comfortable silence fell between them. Two parents from vastly different worlds connected by loss, by need, by the unexpected kindness of children. I should check on the girls, Catherine said eventually. Good night, Jackson. Catherine, he called as she reached the door. I have connections at several private schools in the city. When you're ready, the twins deserve a good education. Instead of the rejection he expected, Catherine simply nodded. They do. And when I'm on my feet again, I'd like to teach. Perhaps you know someone who might hire a teacher with a 2-year employment gap? I might, Jackson replied, something like admiration in his eyes. For the first time in years, Catherine went to sleep planning for a future rather than just surviving the present. And for the first time since Sophie's death, Jackson thought about tomorrow with something other than dread. 2 weeks into their new living arrangement, routines began to form. Jackson visited every other evening, always bringing something small for the twins, books, art supplies, once a puzzle that they all worked on together at the dining table. Tonight was Catherine's turn to fulfill her part of their bargain. She'd prepared dinner, nothing fancy, just homemade lasagna and garlic bread, but the pride she felt seeing it laid out on the elegant dining table surprised her. Something smells amazing, Jackson said as he entered, hanging his coat on the rack that was quickly becoming his spot. Jackson. The twins raced from their room, Emma clutching a drawing while Lily carried a small clay figurine. Look what we made at school. Catherine watched as Jackson crouched to their level, examining their creations with genuine interest. The private school he'd arranged for them was beyond anything she could have imagined. Small classes, caring teachers, art and music programs. The twins were thriving, making friends, coming home with stories instead of hunger. These are wonderful, Jackson praised, his smile reaching his eyes, something that happened more frequently now. True artists in the making. At dinner, the twins dominated the conversation, their chatter filling the apartment with life. Catherine noticed how Jackson watched them, sometimes with joy, sometimes with a shadow of pain that she recognized as memories of Sophie. Girls, why don't you go get ready for bed? Catherine suggested when they'd finished eating. Jackson and I will be in to say goodnight soon. When they were alone, Jackson helped clear the table, his expensive watch and tailored shirt looking strangely at home in this domestic scene. Thank you for dinner, he said. It's been a long time since I've had a home-cooked meal. Surely you have a chef or something, Catherine replied, loading the dishwasher. Jackson shook his head. I did. After Sophie, I let most of the household staff go. Couldn't stand the emptiness they tried to fill with their efficiency. Catherine studied him as he dried a plate. You're different from what I expected. Oh, when Emma told me a rich man in a fancy coat had helped them, I pictured some Wall Street type patting himself on the back for his charity, she admitted. I didn't expect you to keep showing up. Jackson placed the dried plate in the cabinet. I didn't expect to want to. The honesty in his voice created a moment of connection that Catherine wasn't prepared for. She turned back to the sink, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her chest. Mommy, Jackson, we're ready, Lily called from down the hall. In the twins' bedroom, they found the girls already in bed, Emma clutching her beloved teddy bear newly repaired with a button eye Jackson had sewn on himself. Will you tell us about Sophie? Emma asked suddenly. Jackson froze and Catherine started to redirect the conversation, but he raised a hand to stop her. What would you like to know? He asked, sitting on the edge of Emma's bed. Was she nice? Did she like ice cream? Did she have toys like us? The questions tumbled out with the characteristic directness of children. Catherine watched Jackson carefully, ready to intervene if the memories became too painful. But instead of retreating, he smiled sadly. She was very nice. She loved strawberry, ice cream, and yes, she had many toys. He paused, then reached for his wallet and removed a small photo. This was Sophie. The twins leaned forward to see the smiling blonde girl with her father's eyes and a missing front tooth. She looks like a good friend, Lily said solemnly. The best, Jackson agreed, his voice thick. Is she why you were crying on the train? Emma asked. Jackson nodded. I miss her very much. Emma reached for his hand. You can share us, she said, simply. Right, Mommy. Catherine felt her throat tighten at her daughter's innocent generosity. Time for sleep now, girls, she said softly, leaning down to kiss each forehead. In the hallway, Jackson stood silent, the photo still in his hand. I'm sorry, Catherine began. They don't understand. No, Jackson interrupted. They understand. Perfectly. He carefully returned the photo to his wallet. Out of the mouths of babes, right? Catherine touched his arm gently. Stay for coffee? Something vulnerable and hopeful flickered in Jackson's eyes, a look that made Catherine both terrified and exhilarated. I'd like that, he said. As they walked back to the kitchen, Catherine realized that the line between benefactor and friend had begun to blur, creating something new and undefined between them. Something as fragile and precious as the trust in her daughter's eyes when they looked at Jackson Reed. Catherine's phone call with her doctor ended just as Jackson arrived for their now regular Friday dinner. One look at her face told him something was wrong. Girls, why don't you show me your new science project? He suggested, giving Catherine a moment to compose herself. Emma and Lily eagerly led him to their room, chattering about volcanoes and baking soda. When Catherine joined them 15 minutes later, her smile was back in place, but Jackson could see the strain behind it. Throughout dinner, she maintained the facade, laughing at the twins' jokes and asking Jackson about his day. Only when the girls were engrossed in their dessert did he lean close and whisper, "What happened?" Catherine shook her head slightly. Later, after the twins were asleep, they sat on the balcony, the April night unusually warm. Catherine stared at her tea, the steam rising between them like the words she couldn't bring herself to say. My test results came back, she finally said. The treatment isn't working as well as they hoped. They want to try something more aggressive. Jackson set down his coffee. What does that mean? More hospital stays, stronger side effects. She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Higher costs. Catherine, money isn't. Don't, she interrupted. Please don't say it isn't an issue. You've already done too much. Jackson leaned forward. You can't put a price on what you and the girls have given me these past weeks. Friendship isn't a transaction, Jackson, Catherine said, her voice harder than he'd ever heard it. And I won't have my daughters thinking their company is something to be traded for security. The words stung, but Jackson recognized the fear beneath them. That's not what I meant. I just want to help. I know, Catherine sighed. But I need to handle this myself. For my own dignity, if nothing else. Jackson respected her too much to argue, but the businessman in him was already formulating a plan. The next morning, Catherine was surprised to find Martha waiting in the lobby when she returned from dropping the twins at school. "Ms. Miller," Jackson's assistant greeted her. "Mr. Reed asked me to deliver this." She handed Catherine an envelope. He also mentioned that Reed Enterprises is looking for an education consultant for our STEM outreach program. The position includes full benefits and flexible hours. If you're interested, I have the details. Catherine stared at the envelope, then at Martha's carefully neutral expression. "He's offering me a job?" "The position exists, Ms. Miller, and based on your background, you're qualified." Martha's professional demeanor softened slightly. "For what it's worth, he was up all night researching how to create a position that would actually utilize your skills rather than just be charity." Inside the apartment, Catherine opened the envelope to find information about a clinical trial for her condition at Chicago Memorial, one of the best hospitals in the country. A handwritten note from Jackson read simply, "This isn't charity, it's investment in my friend's future." Before she could process this, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Ms. Miller? This is Principal Davis from Lakeside Academy. I'm calling about Lily." Catherine's heart dropped. "Is she all right?" "Physically, yes. But there's been an incident. We need you to come in right away." At the school, Catherine found Lily sitting outside the principal's office, tears streaking her face. Emma sat beside her, holding her twin's hand. "What happened?" Catherine asked, kneeling before them. "Tyler said we were charity cases," Lily whispered. "He said we only got in because a rich man felt sorry for us." "I told him to shut up," Emma added fiercely. But Lily pushed him and he fell. Principal Davis appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Miller, if we could speak privately." Inside the office, the principal explained the situation. "Tyler's parents are upset. They're threatening to press the issue with the board." "He was bullying my daughters," Catherine replied, anger replacing her initial shock. "I understand," Principal Davis said sympathetically, "but the Bradleys are major donors, and given the unusual circumstances of the twins' enrollment." Catherine understood immediately. "You mean because Jackson Reed is paying their tuition?" The principal had the grace to look embarrassed. "It puts the school in a difficult position. So does discriminating against children because of their background," Catherine countered, years of teaching experience giving her confidence. "I wonder if Mr. Reed would be interested to hear how his generous donation is being managed." The mention of Jackson's name worked exactly as she'd hoped. Principal Davis backpedaled quickly, assuring her that Lily would receive only a warning, while Tyler would be spoken to about his behavior. As they left the school, Catherine texted Jackson, "Need to talk. Not about the job or the trial. Something else." His reply came immediately, "On my way." Catherine looked at her daughters, their small faces troubled by their first encounter with class prejudice. The fragile new world they were building was facing its first real test, and Catherine realized that regardless of her pride, she needed Jackson, not just his resources, but his presence, his support, his place in their lives, and that terrified her more than any medical diagnosis. Jackson arrived at the apartment to find Catherine pacing the living room while the twins built a fort from couch cushions, their usual remedy for tough days. "What happened?" he asked, immediately concerned by the tension in Catherine's shoulders. She led him to the kitchen out of the girl's earshot and told him about the incident at school. With each word, Jackson's expression darkened. "I'll have a word with Bradley," he said when she finished. "We sit on a charity board together." "That's exactly what I don't want," Catherine replied firmly. "The girls need to learn to handle these situations, not have them magically fixed by their—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Friend?" Jackson offered. "Friend," Catherine agreed with a small smile. "Though the principal did back down pretty quickly when I mentioned your name," Jackson laughed. "The Reed effect, my sister calls it my superpower." "Speaking of which," Catherine said, pulling the envelope from her pocket, This job offer, is it real? Entirely, Jackson assured her. Martha helped structure it, but we genuinely need someone with classroom experience to evaluate our education initiatives. The company donates millions to STEM programs, but we've never had an actual teacher assess their effectiveness. Catherine studied his face, looking for signs of deception or pity. And the clinical trial? I made one phone call, Jackson admitted. Just to get you on the list for consideration. The rest is up to your doctors and the trial coordinators. For a moment, Catherine was silent, weighing her pride against practicality. Finally, she nodded. I'll interview for the job and talk to my doctor about the trial. Relief washed over Jackson's face. Thank you for letting me help. Their moment was interrupted by a crash from the living room, followed by Emma's cry. They rushed in to find her clutching her arm. The fort collapsed around her. I fell, she sobbed as Catherine knelt beside her. The trip to the emergency room was quick thanks to Jackson's influence, but Emma's diagnosis, a fractured wrist, cast a pall over the evening. As she sat in the treatment room, her small arm being set in a pink cast, she looked up at Jackson with tear-filled eyes. Will you sign it first? She asked. Jackson blinked back unexpected tears. It would be my honor. Later, with Emma asleep in her hospital bed for overnight observation, and Lily staying with Martha, Catherine and Jackson sat in the quiet waiting room, exhaustion etched in their faces. You were amazing with her, Catherine said softly. The way you kept her calm during the X-ray, the stories you told to distract her. Jackson stared at his coffee cup. Sophie broke her arm when she was 5. Playground accident. I was in Tokyo when it happened. He looked up, his expression haunted. I missed so much, Catherine. Business dinners instead of bedtime stories. Conference calls instead of parent-teacher conferences. Catherine reached for his hand, a gesture that had become familiar in recent weeks. You're here now. For Emma. For Lily. For you, Jackson added, his voice low. The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. I need to tell you something, Catherine said after a moment. My condition, it's more serious than I've let on. The relapse, it's not just a setback. Without this new treatment. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Jackson's grip on her hand tightened. What do the twins know? He asked practically. Just that Mommy gets tired sometimes. Catherine whispered, her composure finally cracking. Jackson, if something happens to me, it won't, he interrupted fiercely. But if it does, she insisted, they have no one. No family, no guardian, no... They have me, Jackson said, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. If you'll trust me with them. Catherine looked at him. This man who had entered their lives by chance, whose grief had mirrored her fear, whose generosity had given her daughters opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. Why? She asked simply. Why us? Why this? Jackson was silent for a long moment. When Sophie died, I died too. I was just going through the motions, Catherine, then Emma and Lily found me, and he struggled to find the words. They needed me. No one's needed me, really needed me since Sophie was born. And now, Catherine pressed, sensing there was more. Jackson met her gaze directly. Now I need you, all of you. I need your daughters. Laughter in my empty life. I need your strength and your pride and your homemade lasagna. His attempt at humor fell flat as emotion overwhelmed him. I need this family you've created. The word family hung in the air between them, as fragile and precious as the trust in Emma's eyes when she'd asked Jackson to sign her cast first. Before Catherine could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Ms. Miller, your daughter's asking for you. And Mr. Reed. As they walked back to Emma's room, Catherine knew they stood at a crossroads. The path forward would require trust she wasn't sure she possessed, vulnerability she'd spent years avoiding, and faith in a future neither of them had imagined just months ago. Yet as Emma's face lit up at the sight of them, Catherine felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to something that felt dangerously like hope. 7 years earlier, Jackson, Reed stood in a hospital room much like Emma's, holding his newborn daughter for the first time. The joy of Sophie's arrival was shattered by the doctor's words. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. We couldn't stop the bleeding. Your wife is gone." In that moment, as he looked into his daughter's innocent face, Jackson made a silent vow. He would give this child everything, protect her from all harm, build a world where she would never want for anything. What he couldn't know then was how that promise would shape his life. The driven businessman he'd become, the father who provided everything except enough of his presence. Now, as he watched Catherine sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Emma's hospital bed, Jackson wondered what Elizabeth would think of the man he'd become. His late wife had loved his ambition, but tempered it with her own gentle wisdom. Would she approve of this unexpected bond with a struggling single mother and her twins? Somehow, he thought she would. Across the room, Catherine stirred, fragments of her own past filtering through her dreams. 6 years ago, she sat across from Mark Miller as he slid the unsigned birth certificate across the table of their small apartment. "Twins?" he'd said, his voice cold with disbelief. "And now this diagnosis? This isn't what I signed up for, Kate." "Neither did I," she'd replied, her hand protectively covering her swollen belly where Emma and Lily grew, blissfully unaware of their father's rejection. "But it's what we have." He'd left that night taking what little savings they'd accumulated, leaving behind only his absence and a promise unkept. Catherine had given birth alone, named her daughters alone, and built a life for them alone. Until her body betrayed her and that carefully constructed world began to crumble. Now she opened her eyes to find Jackson watching her, his gaze thoughtful. "You were dreaming," he said softly, mindful of Emma still sleeping. Catherine straightened in the chair, wincing at her stiff muscles. "Just remembering." "Good memories?" "No," she admitted. "The day the twins' father left." Jackson's expression darkened. His loss. The simple conviction in those 2 words warmed Catherine in a way she hadn't expected. "My wife died giving birth to Sophie," Jackson said suddenly. "I never told you that." Catherine reached for his hand, a gesture that had become second nature in recent weeks. "I'm sorry. Elizabeth was the only person who ever really knew me," he continued. "After she died, I just focused on Sophie and the business, didn't let anyone else in. Until 2 little girls ambushed you on a subway," Catherine said with a small smile. Jackson's laugh was quiet but genuine. "They're persuasive." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared loss, of paths neither had chosen but both had walked with dignity. "I'm going to take the job," Catherine said, "and apply for the trial." Jackson squeezed her hand. "I was hoping you would." "Not for the reasons you think," she clarified. "Not just because of the medical benefits or the financial security, but because—" She paused, gathering her courage. "Because I want the girls to see that accepting help doesn't mean surrendering independence, that there's strength in connection." "Is that what we have?" Jackson asked quietly. "Connection?" Before Catherine could answer, Emma stirred, her small face lighting up at the sight of them. "You stayed," she said to Jackson, wonder in her voice. "Of course I did," he replied, moving to her bedside. "How's the arm, brave girl?" As Jackson helped Emma with her breakfast, making her giggle despite her pain, Catherine watched them together. This man who had lost so much, this child who had never known a father's love, fitting together like puzzle pieces meant to connect. Later, when they returned to the apartment with Emma proudly showing off her cast to Lily, Catherine found Jackson on the balcony, his phone in hand. "Everything okay?" she asked, joining him. "My sister Claire is back from Europe," he said, his expression troubled. "She's concerned about my sudden attachment to your family." The words stung, though Catherine had expected something like this eventually. "She thinks I'm after your money." "She doesn't know you," Jackson said firmly, "but she wants to. Sunday dinner at my place. Will you come?" All of you? The invitation hung between them. Not just a meal, but a statement. A step towards something neither had been looking for, but both had found. Yes, Catherine said simply, understanding the weight of her acceptance. We'll come. As they stood, side by side, watching the city lights emerge against the darkening sky, Jackson realized that for the first time since Sophie's death, he was making plans beyond tomorrow, and Catherine, leaning slightly against his shoulder, allowed herself to imagine a future she'd thought forever closed to her, one where she wasn't fighting alone. Behind them, the twins' laughter floated through the open door, the sound that had brought them together, the symphony of the unexpected family they were becoming. Jackson's penthouse overlooked the Chicago skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the sunset in brilliant oranges and pinks. Catherine and the twins stood in the marble foyer, momentarily overwhelmed by the opulence that made their temporary apartment seem modest by comparison. "It's so big," Lily whispered, clutching her sister's hand. Emma, her casted arm decorated with colorful signatures, nodded solemnly. "Like a castle in the clouds." Jackson appeared from the kitchen, looking unexpectedly domestic in jeans and a casual sweater rather than his usual suit. "Welcome to my home," he said, his smile betraying a hint of nervousness Catherine had never seen before. The twins rushed forward, hugging his legs with the easy affection they'd developed for him. Catherine followed more slowly, taking in the space that reflected so much of Jackson's life. Minimalist, expensive, and strangely impersonal, except for a wall of photographs featuring Sophie at various ages. "Your sister isn't here yet?" Catherine asked, smoothing her dress, a simple blue one she'd purchased with her first advance from the Reed Enterprises job. "Claire is pathologically early for everything except social engagements," Jackson explained, leading them to the living room. "She'll be exactly 7 minutes late. It's her power move." True to his prediction, the elevator chimed precisely 7 minutes after the invited time. Claire Reed swept into the penthouse like a cool breeze, tall, blonde, and immaculately styled in a way that made Catherine instantly aware of her department store dress and simple makeup. "Jackie," Claire air-kissed her brother's cheeks before turning her appraising gaze on Catherine and the twins. Jackson made the introductions, his hand instinctively finding the small of Catherine's back in a gesture of support that didn't escape his sister's notice. "So these are your subway saviors," Claire said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Jackson's told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Catherine replied, meeting the other woman's gaze steadily. Dinner began with polite conversation, Claire's travels, Catherine's new position at Reed Enterprises, the twins' school adventures. The girls were on their best behavior, using the manners Catherine had drilled into them despite their years of hardship. "Emma, Lily," Claire said suddenly, "would you like to see pictures of Jackson when he was your age? I have an album in my purse." As the twins eagerly followed Claire to the couch, Jackson leaned close to Catherine. "I'm sorry, she's in full investigation mode." "It's okay," Catherine assured him. "She loves you. She's protecting you." Across the room, they could hear Claire questioning the twins. "So, you like living in my brother's building? And going to that fancy school?" "We love it," Emma said, enthusiastically. "Jackson taught me to play chess, and I'm learning the piano at school." "And do you miss your old home?" Claire pressed gently. Lily's face clouded. "Sometimes. But Mommy isn't sick as much here, and we have our own beds." "And Jackson makes Mommy smile," Emma added innocently. She didn't smile a lot before. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks as Jackson's hand found hers under the table. When the twins were distracted by dessert, an elaborate chocolate creation Jackson's chef had prepared, Claire cornered Catherine in the kitchen. "My brother's been through hell," she said without preamble. "Sophie was everything to him." "I know," Catherine replied calmly. "He's vulnerable," Claire continued, "and generous to a fault." Her implication hung in the air between them. Catherine set down her coffee cup carefully. "Mrs. Porter, the elderly lady who was watching my girls when they ran away, she used to say that people see in others what exists in themselves." She met Claire's gaze directly. If you're looking for an opportunist, you'll find one. If you're looking for someone who cares about your brother beyond his bank account, you might find that too. Claire studied her for a long moment before her expression softened slightly. He's different with you, more like his old self. He's healing. Catherine said, we all are. Back in the dining room, they found Jackson sitting between the twins, helping them build a tower from dessert spoons that collapsed in a clatter of silver and giggles. Catherine couldn't remember seeing him so relaxed, so present. As the evening wound down, Claire pulled her brother aside while Catherine helped the twins with their coats. She's not what I expected, Claire admitted. What did you expect? Jackson asked. Claire shrugged elegantly. Someone less formidable. She glanced at Catherine, who was patiently tying Lily's shoes. The background check showed nothing concerning, by the way. Jackson's expression hardened. You had her investigated? Of course I did, Claire replied unapologetically. Someone needed to be practical while you were having your midlife crisis or spiritual awakening or whatever this is. It's called living again, Jackson said simply. Something in his tone made Claire look at him. Really look at him, for the first time since her return. You're in love with her, she said, not a question but a realization. Jackson watched Catherine with the twins, her gentle efficiency, her quiet strength, the smile that reached her eyes when Emma said something that made her laugh. Yes, he said, finally the admission as much to himself as to his sister. I think I am. Claire sighed dramatically, but there was affection beneath her exasperation. Well, at least she makes good coffee, and those little girls are. She paused, searching for the right word. Family, Jackson finished for her. Their family, Claire. As they said their goodbyes, Claire hugged Catherine, a brief but genuine embrace that spoke volumes. Take care of him, she whispered. He needs it more than he knows. In the elevator down to their apartment, Emma leaned sleepily against Jackson's side. I like your sister, she mumbled. She showed us baby pictures. Did she now? Jackson replied, his arm automatically wrapping around the child's shoulders. Catherine watched them together, then caught Jackson's gaze over Emma's head. The look they shared contained a universe of unspoken feelings. Gratitude, fear, hope, and something deeper that neither was ready to name but both had begun to recognize. Family, Jackson had called them. And for the first time in years, Catherine allowed herself to believe it might be true. Catherine's first month at Reed Enterprises had gone better than she'd dared hope. Her role evaluating the company's education initiatives utilized her teaching experience while accommodating her health needs. The flexible hours allowed her to be there for the twins, and the salary was more than generous. Too generous, according to the whispers that followed her through the gleaming hallways of Reed Tower. Morning. Ms. Miller, her assistant Greg said as Catherine arrived at her office. The education committee reports are on your desk and... He hesitated, lowering his voice. Just a heads up, there's been some talk. Catherine set down her bag. What kind of talk? Greg looked uncomfortable. About you and Mr. Reed, people wondering if your relationship is why you got this position. Though she'd expected this eventually, the words still stung. Thank you for telling me, she said calmly. Alone in her office, Catherine stared at the Chicago skyline through her window. The past weeks had been something from a dream, the twins thriving at school, her health improving with the new treatment, and Jackson. Jackson becoming something she'd never expected, never dared hope for. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. Dinner tonight? My place, just us. Claire's taking the twins to that animated movie they've been talking about. Catherine smiled at the message, then frowned as Greg's warning echoed in her mind. She was falling for Jackson, had already fallen, if she was honest with herself. But these whispers reinforced her deepest fear, that people would always see her as a charity case, an opportunist, a woman who'd traded her company for security. When she didn't immediately respond, Jackson called. Is everything okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Fine, she said too quickly, Just busy with the committee reports. Catherine, Jackson said, his tone gentle but firm. What's wrong? She sighed, never able to hide things from him. People are talking, Jackson. About us, about why I'm here. His response was immediate. I'll address it. This is unacceptable. No, Catherine insisted. That would only make it worse. Confirm their suspicions that I'm getting special treatment. You're not, Jackson said firmly. You earned this position. Your background evaluation of the Chicago pilot program saved us millions and improved outcomes for the students. His defense warmed her, but the doubt remained. Maybe we should be more professional at work. Keep some distance. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. If that's what you want, Jackson finally said, his voice carefully neutral. It wasn't what she wanted, not at all. But Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was built on shaky ground. Just for now, she said softly. Until I've established myself here. Jackson agreed, but the distance in his tone lasted through the rest of their brief conversation. That evening, instead of their planned dinner, Catherine found herself alone, in the apartment, the twins out with Claire replaying the conversation in her mind. Had she made a mistake? Was she letting pride interfere with happiness again? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a delivery man with a large envelope. Catherine Miller, he confirmed, handing her the package. Inside was a manila folder containing photographs. Jackson entering her apartment building late at night, the two of them on the balcony together. Jackson with the twins at the park. Attached was a note. Does Reed Enterprises know about the CEO's special project? The board might be interested in these. Catherine's hands shook as she flipped through the photos. They were innocent moments, but presented this way, they seemed calculated and secretive. She immediately called Jackson, but it went to voicemail. Next, she tried Claire, who answered on the second ring. Is everything all right? Claire asked, the sounds of the movie theater in the background. Someone's been watching us, Catherine explained, her voice tense. Taking pictures. They sent them to me with a threat to show the board. Blackmail, Claire said sharply. Don't worry. The girls are fine. We're heading home now. I'll drop them with my assistant and meet you at Jackson's. An hour later, Catherine and Claire spread the photos across Jackson's dining table. He stood at the window, his back to them, shoulders rigid with anger. It's Reynolds, Claire said confidently. He's wanted your position for years. Or Bradley after the school incident with Lily, Catherine suggested. Jackson turned, his expression cold in a way Catherine had never seen. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that they're using you and the girls to get to me. What will you do? Catherine asked. Protect you, Jackson said simply. Whatever it takes. The intensity in his eyes both comforted and frightened Catherine. This was a side of Jackson she hadn't seen. The ruthless businessman who'd built an empire. Jackson, she said carefully, don't do anything that would harm the company. That's what they want. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. I built Reed Enterprises from nothing. I can do it again if necessary. But you, Emma Lilly, you're irreplaceable. The declaration hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity and implication. Claire cleared her throat. Well, I'll leave you two to your Romeo and Juliet moment. I've got some calls to make. She squeezed Catherine's shoulder as she passed. Don't worry, the Reeds protect their own. When they were alone, Jackson pulled Catherine into his arms. I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I never wanted this to touch you or the girls. Catherine leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. What happens now? Now, Jackson said, his voice resolute. We stop hiding. No more distance. No more separate dinners. Whoever is behind this wins if they drive us apart. Catherine nodded against his chest, but a seed of doubt had been planted. If their relationship could be wielded as a weapon against Jackson, was it worth the risk? As much as she wanted this, wanted him, she couldn't bear to be the cause of his downfall. And yet, as his arms tightened around her, She couldn't imagine walking away. The emergency board meeting of Reed Enterprises was called for 9 a.m. sharp. Jackson arrived early, Catherine at his side. They'd agreed on this united front despite her misgivings. "You don't have to do this," she whispered as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. Jackson took her hand firmly in his. "Yes, I do." The boardroom fell silent as they entered together. 12 pairs of eyes tracked their movement, expressions, ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Claire was already seated, her icy glare fixed on Thomas Reynolds, the chief operating officer who'd been with the company almost as long as Jackson. "Thank you all for coming," Jackson began. Without preamble, "I understand concerns have been raised about my personal relationship with Catherine Miller and its impact on company decisions." Catherine kept her expression neutral, despite the heat rising to her cheeks. Beneath the table, Jackson's hand found hers again. "So I'll be clear," he continued. "Yes, I am in a relationship with Ms. Miller. No, it did not influence her hiring, her qualifications did. And if anyone has issues with either of those facts, now is the time to speak." The silence that followed was deafening until Reynolds cleared his throat. "The board's concern, Jackson, is the appearance of impropriety. The company's reputation is built on results," Jackson interrupted, "which Ms. Miller has delivered. Her education initiative assessment saved us millions and improved outcomes for students." Reynolds smiled thinly. "No one questions her competence. But surely you understand how this looks, especially given her background." Catherine felt Jackson tense beside her. "Her background as an award-winning teacher? Or are you referring to something else, Tom?" The implication hung heavy in the air. "All I'm saying," Reynolds continued smoothly, "is that the anonymous photos sent to board members raise questions about judgment and transparency." So it had gone further than they thought. Catherine fought to maintain her composure as Reynolds revealed that all board members had received the photos, along with detailed accounts of the twins' enrollment at Lakeside Academy and Catherine's medical treatments at Chicago Memorial. "I move that we place Ms. Miller on administrative leave while an independent committee reviews her hiring and role," Reynolds concluded. Before Jackson could respond, Catherine stood. "That won't be necessary. I resign, effective immediately." "Catherine." "No," Jackson began, but she cut him off with a look. "My work speaks for itself," she told the board calmly. "I won't allow it to be undermined by gossip and innuendo. Mr. Reed hired me because I'm qualified. The fact that we care for each other shouldn't erase that. But clearly for some of you it does." She gathered her papers and walked out, head high despite the tears threatening to fall. Jackson followed her to the elevator, his expression a storm of anger and concern. "You didn't have to do that," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Yes, I did," Catherine replied softly. "For my dignity, for yours." The elevator doors closed between them, a physical manifestation of the barrier that had just been erected in their carefully constructed world. Back in the apartment, Catherine found a voicemail from the twins' school. An emergency meeting had been called regarding their enrollment status, another consequence of the photos, no doubt. As she sank onto the couch, Catherine wondered how quickly their fragile happiness was unraveling. The life they'd been building seemed to be collapsing around them, all because she'd allowed herself to hope for something more than survival. When Jackson finally arrived home that evening, his expression told her everything. "Reynolds is gone," he said simply, "but the damage is done." Catherine sat across from Principal Davis, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. The twins were in class, blissfully unaware of the meeting that might determine their educational future. "Ms. Miller," Principal Davis began uncomfortably, "certain concerns have been raised by other parents regarding your relationship with Mr. Reed and its connection to the twins' scholarship." "You mean gossip fueled by those photos?" Catherine said evenly. The principal had the grace to look embarrassed. "We value Emma and Lily as students. Their academic progress has been remarkable. But the Board of Trustees is concerned about appearances," Catherine finished for her. "Just like Reed Enterprises." "Essentially, yes." Catherine took a deep breath. My daughters have lost enough in their short lives. I won't let them lose this too. Before Principal Davis could respond, the office door opened and Jackson strode in, looking every inch the CEO despite the strain evident in his face. I apologize for being late, he said, taking the seat beside Catherine. His hand found hers, instinctively. The principal's demeanor shifted immediately. Mr. Reed, we were just discussing my family. Jackson interrupted firmly. Catherine and the twins are my family, and I won't have them penalized for it. The word family hung in the air between them. Catherine squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence. The twins' scholarship comes directly from my personal foundation, Jackson continued. Not corporate funds. Their academic records speak for themselves. If that's not enough for Lakeside, we'll find a school that values education over gossip. His defense, delivered with quiet intensity, left Principal Davis fumbling for words. She promised to convey his position to the board and ended the meeting hastily. In the hallway, Catherine turned to Jackson, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you? Don't thank me, he said, his voice rough with feeling. I should have protected you all better. This isn't your fault, Catherine insisted. It's the price of living in the public eye. A price you and the girls shouldn't have to pay. They walked in silence to the car, the weight of recent events bearing down on them. Catherine thought about the twins, how quickly they'd adapted to each new challenge, how resilient they'd been. What happens now? She asked as they drove away from the school. Jackson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That depends on what you want, Catherine. What I want, she echoed, surprised by the question. I've made decisions about our lives, the apartment, the school, the job, believing they were best for you and the girls. But I never asked what you really wanted. The candor in his voice made Catherine turn to study his profile. I want the twins to be happy and safe, she said slowly. I want my health to stabilize so I can be there for them. And I want, she hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Tell me, Jackson urged softly. I want not to be afraid anymore, Catherine admitted, of being sick, of being homeless, of caring about you. Jackson pulled the car over and turned, to face her fully. I'm afraid too, he confessed. Afraid of losing you all like I lost Sophie. Afraid you'll see me only as a safety net, not as a man who... Who what? Catherine whispered. Who loves you? Jackson said simply. Who loves Emma and Lily? Who wants to build a life with you, not out of obligation or guilt or loneliness, but because you've brought meaning back to my world. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, months of tightly controlled emotion finally breaking free. I love you too, she managed through her tears. But I'm scared it's not enough. That we're too different, from worlds too far apart. Jackson cupped her face gently. Then we build our own world, together. In that moment, with Chicago traffic flowing around their stationary car, Catherine made her choice. Not out of necessity or gratitude, but out of love. The kind that comes unexpectedly and changes everything. Together, she agreed. And when Jackson kissed her, it felt like coming home. The announcement appeared in the Chicago Tribune's business section. Reed Enterprises CEO steps back, names Claire Reed as acting chief executive. The accompanying article detailed Jackson's decision to focus on the Reed Foundation, particularly its education and family support initiatives. Sometimes life gives you a second chance at what matters most, Jackson was quoted saying. I'm taking mine. Catherine read the article over breakfast, the twins chattering beside her about their upcoming school play. You didn't tell me about this, she said when Jackson joined them, coffee in hand. He shrugged, a lightness to his movements that hadn't been there before. I wanted it to be official first. But the company, it's your life's work, Catherine said, still processing the implications. It was, Jackson corrected gently. Now it's just work. Important work, but not everything. He glanced meaningfully at the twins, then back to Catherine. Not anymore. 2 months had passed since their confrontation with the school and the board. 2 months of rebuilding and redefining their relationship on their own terms. Jackson had moved the twins to a progressive private school where their scholarship raised no eyebrows. Catherine's health had stabilized with the new treatment, allowing her to accept a part-time teaching position at the twins' school. And though they still maintained separate residences, Catherine's pride requiring this last vestige of independence, they functioned increasingly as a family unit. "I have something for you," Jackson said, sliding a small box across the table after the twins left for the school bus. Catherine opened it to find a delicate silver key. "What's this?" "The lake house," Jackson explained. "I thought we could go there this weekend, all of us." The Reed family lake house in Michigan was legendary, a sprawling estate where generations of Reeds had summered. Jackson hadn't visited since Sophie's death. "Are you sure?" Catherine asked, understanding the significance. Jackson nodded. "It's time to make new memories there." That weekend, as the twins explored the lakefront property with childish delight, Jackson led Catherine to a quiet spot overlooking the water. "I brought Sophie here every summer," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She loved the water, would spend all day swimming if I let her." Catherine slipped her hand into his. "Thank you for sharing this with us." "I want to share everything with you," Jackson replied, turning to face her fully. "My past, my present, my future." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with implication. "Jackson," Catherine began, but he gently interrupted. "I'm not proposing. Not yet." His smile was tender. "I know you're not ready, but I want you to know that when you are, I'll be here. No rush, no pressure." Catherine's heart swelled with emotion. This man who had everything had given her the most precious gift of all, time and space to heal, to grow, to choose. That evening, they built a bonfire on the beach. As the twins roasted marshmallows, squealing with delight when they caught fire, Jackson wrapped an arm around Catherine's shoulders. "I have something else for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside, Catherine found legal documents, a trust established for Emma and Lily, providing for their education through college, and a deed to the apartment they'd been living in, transferred to Catherine's name. "I can't accept this," she said immediately, her old pride flaring. "It's not a gift," Jackson clarified. "It's security for the girls, regardless of what happens between us. If you accept me, accept this too, not as charity, but as my commitment to their future." Catherine looked at her daughters, their faces glowing in the firelight, then back to the man who had changed their lives in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Okay," she said simply, letting go of the last of her resistance. As darkness fell, Emma spontaneously began to sing, the same song she'd once sung to a crying stranger on a subway train. Lily joined in, their sweet voices harmonizing in the night air. "You Are My Sunshine" had never sounded more poignant, more perfect, as it drifted across the peaceful lake, a melody of hope, of family found in the most unexpected of places, of love that heals even the deepest wounds. 1 year later, Jackson stood in the crowded auditorium of Westlake Academy, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Beside him, Catherine squeezed his hand reassuringly, her smile radiant in the warm June light filtering through the windows. "They'll be wonderful," she whispered as the elementary school choir assembled on stage. Jackson nodded, his eyes fixed on the 2 small blonde heads in the front row, Emma and Lily, dressed in matching blue dresses, their faces solemn with concentration, as the music teacher raised her baton. The past year had brought changes none of them could have imagined that fateful night on the subway. The Reed Foundation's new initiative, providing integrated medical care and housing for families with health challenges, had launched to national acclaim. Catherine had returned to full-time teaching, her condition in remission thanks to the clinical trial. The twins had blossomed at their new school, their natural intelligence nurtured by teachers who saw beyond their humble beginnings, and Jackson. Jackson had found purpose beyond business success, joy beyond grief, love beyond loss. The choir began to sing, their young voices rising in harmony. When the solo section began, Emma stepped forward, her confidence evident as she sang the opening verse of "You Are My Sunshine." Lily joined for the chorus, the twins' voices blending perfectly. Tears pricked Jackson's eyes as he watched them shine. Catherine's head came to rest on his shoulder, her presence a steady comfort beside him. "They're amazing," he whispered. "They are," Catherine agreed. "Sophie would be proud of you, you know." The mention of his daughter no longer brought sharp pain, just a bittersweet ache, a reminder of what had been and what might have been. "I think she would," Jackson said softly. "She always wanted siblings." After the performance, as proud parents milled around congratulating their children, Claire arrived with an armful of flowers for the twins. "Sorry I'm late," she said, embracing her brother. "Board meeting ran long." She handed Catherine a small box. "For you. Open it later." Catherine tucked it into her purse with a curious smile. Claire's initial skepticism had evolved into genuine affection over the months, the two women finding common ground in their love for Jackson and the twins. That evening, after a celebration dinner and tucking the excited twins into bed, Catherine and Jackson retreated to the balcony of what was now truly their home, a penthouse they'd selected together, decorated with children's artwork alongside elegant furnishings, a place that reflected their blended lives. "Claire's gift," Jackson reminded her as they settled into the comfortable chairs. Catherine opened the small box to find a vintage silver key on a delicate chain. "It was our grandmother's," Jackson explained, "given to each Reed bride for generations." He took her hand. "Claire's way of saying she's ready when we are." Catherine's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I'm ready," she said simply. Jackson blinked in surprise. "You are?" She nodded, a year of healing and growth evident in her serene smile. "The twins asked me last week if you were going to be their dad forever. I realized I didn't have a good reason to say no anymore." Jackson knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Catherine Miller, will you marry me? Will you and the girls make me the happiest man in Chicago?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the sound of small feet padded across the living room. Emma and Lily appeared in the doorway, teddy bear in tow, somehow sensing the momentous occasion. "Did you ask her?" Emma inquired solemnly. Jackson laughed, not at all surprised the twins were in on the secret. "I did." She said yes. The girls rushed forward, throwing themselves into the embrace, their joy pure and uncomplicated. Looking at their small family circle, formed by chance, strengthened by choice, bound by love, Jackson thought of that dark night on the subway when he'd been drowning in grief. How two small voices had pulled him back to life. How a proud, struggling mother had taught him to love again. Some called it coincidence. Some called it fate. Jackson Reed called it his second chance. A journey from darkness to light, from loss to love, from isolation to family. A journey that had begun with a child's song on a Chicago subway and culminated here, in the arms of the woman and children who had become his world. "Can we sing our song?" Lily asked, her small face earnest in the moonlight. And so, on the balcony high above the city where their story began, they sang together, a family created not by blood, but by something far stronger, the courage to begin again.